Hey guys, Tammy here. In this video, we're going to talk about hostility. Now, I know in the very beginning, this is really, really hard to not feel hostile, particularly towards your co-parent. Usually the co-parenting is the source of a lot of the hostility, especially at the initial breakup. Before we dive in, I'm just going to remind you to hit like on this video if you like this content, and also subscribe to the channel so you get notified as new videos are released. Now, one of the problems with hostility is, it's like drinking poison and hoping the other person dies, right? It causes you to feel negative emotions. It causes you to be unhappy. It causes you to, sometimes it can manifest physically, right? As illness and all kinds of different things. So honestly, the first thing to remember is that hostility hurts you more than it hurts the other person. That's first and foremost. The second thing that I think it does a lot is this manifests in ways that cause you to be reactive and uncooperative to your co-parent, which actually ends up sabotaging you in court. So a lot of times we feel like that other person has done really unbelievable things. They're not a good person. They don't care about the kids. All these different types of things that I hear people say. And yet when we give full vent to our hostility, many, many times we look like the problem because they're often the ones sitting over there all calm, cool, and collected, right? Because they're doing all these things, but they come off as calm, and then you get angry at their bad behaviors, and then you look like the problem because you're behaving hostile towards them. And I've seen this really take extreme turns where parents have literally lost custody of their children because their behavior was so extreme and so bad. My late husband Thomas had a case at the very beginning of this journey for us, which is 13 14 years ago. This is one of his very first clients. And if you don't know Thomas or who I'm talking about, go back and look at previous YouTube stuff and you'll find it. He was an attorney. I was married to him. He passed away about 10 months ago. But anyway, we had this client where she actually, the relationship had been really, really abusive, like to the point where she was hospitalized at one point, and she actually had a restraining order against dad in the very beginning. And her behavior towards him was so hostile that she would do things like she tried to register the child for school using a different, like her maiden last name instead of dad's name. She would go to, dad had supervised visitation at one point, and she would go to the visitation place to drop off the child. And then she would sit outside and she would like glare at dad when he came and went. And all these different types of things that were, somewhat subtle, but they happened often enough over a long enough period of time that actually dad ended up getting full custody of the child, and she got visitation. Now, it took a few years, and dad had to go through all of his hoops of supervised visitation and proving himself and, proving that he wasn't abusive to the child and all these different things. But he eventually did succeed. And then her counter behavior worked against her so much that she ended up losing parenting time with the child. Her hostility ended up causing her to lose that time. And so what happens? Who did she really hurt in that situation? She didn't hurt dad at all, I would say. If anything, she helped him, right? Who she hurt was herself and her child, because the child then ended up having to go with somebody that she saw as abusive. I know that the domestic violence thing is thrown around a lot. In this particular case, there was obvious physical evidence of bruising and, beating and all kinds of different things. So, this was a legitimate abusive case. But again, despite that fact, her hostility towards him came through so much that it ended up causing her to lose significant parenting time. Again, the ultimate person this hurts is the children. And that's really the piece of this that I think we have to look at, because indulging in that hostility and indulging in that anger towards the other parent, it's one thing for that to go between the adults, right? You don't like them, they don't like you, whatever. You're two adults, you can walk away and not worry about it. But if you have a child together, that child is going to grow up experiencing that hostility, experiencing that conflict. And most of the time, if you talk to children and ask them, like, what is it they hate the most of them will say about having divorced parents. Most of them will say the arguing between the parents. That's the most common answer. And there are tons of studies that talk about, they've done all these long-term studies of children of divorce and the different impact. And the most detrimental factor post-divorce for children is conflict between the parents. So this really is significant for your child. So I would really invite you to try to deal with that hostility, get therapy, get coaching, whatever you got to do to deal with it. But it really can be one of the most negative things for your child. And I can tell you from my own personal experience that, my children are older now. They're 29 and 33, but their conflict between me and their dad still impacts them to this day. I remember my son's son, my grandson, his birthday last year. My son called his dad and said, "Hey, we're having to get together here." And dad's first question was, "Is your mom going to be there?" And my son was like, "Yeah." And he's like, "Well, then I won't be there." And I just thought, I don't really have any hostility towards my ex-husband at this point. I can be in a room with him. We do fine. We don't have active conflict. I don't really know why he feels the anger that he feels. But at this point, he's not hurting me. He's hurting our children. He's hurting our grandchildren. So this doesn't just stop when your child turns 18. It's not like it's going to be all solved. If you can't eventually get to a place where you can be in the same space with that other person, your children are going to suffer. Your grandchildren are going to suffer because they're always having to make these choices between the two parents and never able to just have a normal situation for themselves. Thomas and his ex-wife, were really good. They got to the point where they could even do holidays together a lot of times. Now, I know that's a tall order and most of us can't get to that place. I've never gotten to that place with my ex-husband, but thankfully they were. And you know what that did? That gave their children the opportunity to have their entire family together during those significant moments in their life. And I think that was really good for the boys. And so if you can do that, it's great. If you can't, then fine. You can't be that friendly toward your ex. Cool. But let's not have the level of hostility to where it's negatively impacting the children and they're having to deal with that on a day-to-day basis, because for most kids, they love both their parents. Even if one parent's a jerk, even if one parent isn't the nicest, they love both of their parents. And so putting them in the middle as a result of your own hostility is just not a kind thing to do. And it's not good parenting, right? Because we want to take that pressure off the children as much as possible. And the court is going to want you to do that. If you're giving vent to your hostility, you are not going to do well in court. The court is going to expect you to be an adult and handle your own emotions and not put your children in the middle. So if you'd like to learn more about my coaching services, you can go to divorceuniversityonline.com/VIP-coaching. You can learn all about my coaching services there, the different programs I have, and I'll see you guys next time.